Let's learn. Okay, Kum Lena Black Gemara. We are up to Daf Tes Amid Aleph. Okay, so now the last thing we're talking about Yevlus, and the last thing you mentioned was about Yevel, that you're actually moisif, that we are adding to the Yevel. We talked about that even though you blow the shofar, but he says you start from Rosh Hashana, and so the concept of adding to Yom Kippur and so on. So we're going to talk about, we didn't know the concept of adding b'chlal. Maybe any Yom Tov or anything that has a fixed time, that's it. What do you mean you have to add on both ends? Says the Gemara. We know Daf Tes Amud Aleph, 4 lines on the top. How do you know that you have to add to Kedusha and take off some time of the Chel? The Tanya, we learned in the Braise, it says in the Braise that on Shabbos you should rest, and then it says that b'chodesh u'v'kotzer tishbais, plowing and harvesting, you should rest. So why highlight these two malachas? So we're going to say we're not even talking about Shabbos, we're talking about a year that's called Shabbos or Shemitah. That the Kibbutz here says, you don't have to say Chodesh v'kotzer shel Shvi. So what are we talking about exactly, Shemitah? You don't have to tell me that we're talking about don't plow or harvest in Shemitah. Why not? It says in Pasuk. It says clearly in the Pasuk you shouldn't plant your field and you shouldn't prune your vineyard. So we know already you're not allowed to harvest. What the pasuk is trying to tell you is the chodesh v'kotzer tishbais. We're not talking about Shabbos because Shabbos, there's 39 malachas, not just 2. We're talking about Shemitah, but he's coming to tell you that Shemitah, because you have to rest, we have to add some time to it. So what's he adding? In addition to where the pasuk says don't plant, he's telling you chodesh shel erev shvius, hanichnas l'shvius, that you're not allowed to plow before Shemitah. That goes right into Shemitah, or which is within 30 days. So too, if it grew a third in the year of Shemitah, you're not allowed to harvest it in the 8th year. In other words, we're adding to the Shemitah year on both ends. Rabbi Shmuel disagrees. He says, no, I'll grant you we're talking about Shemitah. However, Shmuel says, Ma Chodesh Rishus. Sorry, I'm not talking about Shemitah. We're talking about Shabbos. Your question was talking about Shabbos. What do I need a pasuk? You tell me don't only highlighting these 2 malachas, and I'll do 39 malachas. It's coming to tell you something to put it, I guess, what do you call it? To define what exactly we mean when we say don't plow and don't harvest. Not all plowing is forbidden on Shabbos. Not all harvesting is forbidden on Shabbos. As we'll point out that harvesting, which involves a mitzvah or that involves a mitzvah, for example, cutting for the omer, that has to be done the night of the 16th day of Nisan, then you're allowed to permitted to do it even on Shabbos. So he says as follows: Ma Chodesh. We're talking about Shabbos. Now, just like Chodesh plowing definitely is Rishus, there's no possible case, a scenario of plowing on Shabbos that involves a mitzvah. Because even for the Omer, there's no mitzvah to plow for the Omer. Go somewhere that's already been plowed. You don't have to plow something specifically for the Omer. So there's no such thing that plowing is ever really a mitzvah. When it comes to planting, there is possibility of a mitzvah. Of harvesting, there's a possibility of mitzvah because you have to harvest for the omer. So just like we tell you that on Shabbos you're not allowed to plow, all plowing is rishus. So too, when we tell you don't harvest on Shabbos, it means anything similar, which is a rishus. But if it's a harvesting of a mitzvah, you may do that on Shabbos. Yotza p'tira omer shehu mitzvah, cutting down the omer, which is a mitzvah, you're permitted to do that on Shabbos. And even if you found already, it's already been harvested, field that been harvested doesn't help us. You have to go ahead out there and harvest for the sake of the omer. So therefore, Rabbi Shmuel, if he uses chodesh v'kotzer, nothing to do with Tosefos to add. It has to do with what kind of chodesh v'kotzer is also on Shabbos. So the Gemara asks Rabbi Shmuel, Meisifin b'chol al kodesh minolei. So how does he know this whole principle of adding to Yom Kippur? Nafkale, he learns in Tanya, we have a pasuk, we nisem es nafshe seichen betisha, that it says you should fast on Yom Kippur, use the expression, you should fast on the 9th day. Now, who fasts the 9th day? Yochel Betisha, we fasted the 9th day, Tolai Be'erev in the evening. If it's at night, Yochel Mishitach, it means the night of the, even for the night, Tamalai Betisha, on the 9th day. Okay, said, how's it work? You start the 9th and you go into the 10th. It comes to teach you that you have to add to Yom Kippur let it encroach into the 9th day. All I know is when Yom Kippur begins, because it says Betisha, the 9th day. How do you know that even after Yom Kippur you have to add a little bit? Therefore the pasuk says, "May erev ad erev," from evening towards the evening as well. So therefore it tells you it goes into the following night, which night already. And ad is including, it means including part of the night. Ain't really in Kippurim. All we know is in Kippur. Shabbos is benign. How do you know? Osha Shabbos, Tamalim, Tishbesu. It says in the pasuk here that you should rest. Tishbesu Shabbat. Tishbesu means Shabbos. Yom and Tov benign. Tamalim Shabbat. Okay, it's Kol Mokum. So what do we learn from here? Anyway, Sheyesh Boy Shvus. Anywhere that there is an idea of resting. You learn from, you add from Chol to Kodesh. Okay, so therefore, according to Rabbi Shmuel, he learns the whole concept of adding to the Shabbos and Yom Tov from Yom Kippur, and Rabbi Akiva learns it from the Chodesh V'Kotzet Tishbos. That's where he learns it from. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva, since he doesn't use the pasuk for adding to Yom Kippur, what does he do with this pasuk? What does he do with that pasuk? He needs it for look at the what did Abchibarav say? From Difti, you should fast on the 9th day. Fast on Yom Kippur. And I'll tell you, whoever eats and drinks on the 9th day is Milo Lokasa. We'll give you the credit. He's as if you fasted Shiva, the 9th and 10th day. So basically, we have a machlekes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Where do you learn adding? And as a result of that, we have a machlekes. What do you do? The pasuk v'nishim is nafshasechem b'tisha b'chodesh. So according to Rabbi Shmuel, v'nishim nafshasechem comes to tell you add to Yom Kippur to Shabbos and Tisha Shabbatchem. According to Rabbi Akiva, we learn from there the idea if you eat on Erev Yom Kippur, you'll get the credit as if you fasted. So it's clear from here that it's a machlekes. And yet in halacha, we paskin both. We add to the Shabbos, and plus we paskin that you have to eat Erev Yom Kippur. So you mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur. So in Al Terevish, therefore he paskins that eating on Erev Yom Kippur is only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Because Mahatayda, we can use a pasuk for adding to Shabbos and Yom Tov. So we can't use one pasuk teaches two disparate halachas. So it must be it's only d'Rabbanan and it's an asmachta. The Rambam actually passes halacha l'maisa. There is no Tosei Shabbos and Tosei Yom Tov, and there, as the Maggid Mishnah explains. So he uses the Inisa of Seichem to teach you have to eat Erev Yom Kippur. So by him, according to the Rambam, would seem that it would be Mahatayda to eat Erev Yom Kippur. And why does the Torah want you to eat Erev Yom Kippur? Why the Rabbanon? So we have three opinions in halacha. Either is to make the fast easier for us, the Eibishas Rachmanis. Other Rishonim say just the opposite, makes the fast harder for us because we eat too much, your stomach is craving for more food, and now you're denying it food. And the mile of that is, so what's so good about that is, so therefore when you shed more calories when you fast when you're a full stomach, so therefore you get more credit because anything that you shed is like you bring a carbon to the Eibishter. And the third opinion of Ben Yaina, he says, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do because Yom Kippur is a Yom Tov, and Yom Tov you should normally have a Suda. You can't. So therefore we bring the Suda forward to Tisha, to the 9th day of Tishrei. So that day, the 9th day, the meal we're eating, that is our Suda's Yom Tov. And the nafkamin between all of these explanations is what happens if somebody knows he's not going to fast Yom Kippur because the doctor told him not to. They still have a mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur. If it's as a preparation for Yom Kippur or to make it more difficult, then no, there's no mitzvah. But if that's the Yom Tov Suda of Yom Kippur to do on the 9th day, then so be it, and that is it. And this is also one of the reasons why we eat kreplach on Purim, Hoshana Rabbah. and on Erev Yom Kippur. The idea of a krepel is the best part of the krepel is completely camouflaged and covered over by the flour, by the pastry. It is the meat that's inside that's the best part. So you have 3 on time on the calendar that is so concealed you don't even realize that's a Yom Tov. So at Purim, the Gemara actually said they wanted to make it a Yom Tov. That didn't. It's a real Yom Tov, but you're a lot of work, so it's hardly noticeable. Shana Rabbah is the last din of the Rabbah. We push away Shabbos, but nevertheless, nobody realizes it's a Yom Tov. And then Erev Yom Kippur. Erev Yom Kippur is a mitzvah because that is the Yom Tov Sunnah. Yet nobody realizes it's a Yom Tov. Okay, so let's continue. Torah what we learned. It says in the passage, we're talking about Yovel, so it says the 50th year you should sanctify, and you should proclaim freedom throughout the land, and it is Yovel for all the dwellers. And then it says everybody goes back home, and so on and so forth. But first the pasuk says you should blow shofar in order to proclaim that this is Yom Kippur, and this is Yovel. And then it says you should do this thing, and what happens is it says Yovel he, it is Yovel, and what happens Yovel he? That everyone goes back, and that means everyone goes back to their property, and everybody goes back to their homes. Right? All the slaves are set free, everybody goes back to their home. And then the next pasuk says it's Yovel and don't plant like Shemitah. Says the Gemara. So what is it that brings out Yovel? We learned Yovel he, it is Yovel. So a couple of things happen on Yovel. A couple of things happen on Yovel is that you shouldn't plow your fields, you shouldn't plant your fields. The slaves go back home, the properties go back, and you blow shofar. So we learn it says in the pasuk Yovel he. This is Yovel. What do you mean Yovel? This is Yovel. So we darshan, even though you didn't meet all the criteria, afapi shalei shamtu, even though you didn't get treated like Shemitah, even though you didn't do the foul, afapi shalei taku, even though you didn't blow shofar. Even though you didn't blow shofar, you didn't leave the land fallow, you didn't do all those things you're supposed to do, and so you didn't bring the property back. You didn't return, because what happens in Yovel is that all the properties go back to the rightful owner. Even though you didn't do that, you didn't bring the properties back to the rightful owners, which is called Shemitah's Kakois, and nor did you blow the shofar. Nevertheless, it's still treated as Yovel. That therefore you're not allowed to plant, you're not allowed to harvest. All that didn't apply to Yovel. Yachal would have thought, no, since you don't have to meet those criteria, even though you didn't send the slaves back home as well. Yovel he, that you need Yovel, he means you still have to do something. If you did this, it will be Yovel. If you didn't do this, it's not Yovel. So according to this, what's the most pivotal thing for Yovel is the slave freedom. Freedom is that the slaves go back home. The other things are extra. But if the slaves go back home, you have to treat it like Yovel, you know, plant and all that. Now, the Yossi says no, that isn't that integral. That's not an integral part of Yovel. What is it? You know, you didn't send the slaves back home. It's still Yovel. Rabbi Yossi says that it's Yovel, even though you didn't return property, even though you didn't send back slaves, as long as even though you didn't blow shofar. You need to blow shofar. So according to Rabbi Yossi, what's critical is the blowing of the shofar. According to Rabbi Yehuda, what's critical is the slaves go back home, so that it's freedom. So what happened? You have two psukim. You have the word Yovel, which includes everything. And then you have the word he, which comes to limit. Rabbi Yossi is explaining himself. Why does he say that the most important thing is a blowing shofar? Yovel he afapi shalei you didn't send the slaves back. The ein Yovel and can't talk, but the only thing that you must do is blowing shofar. What's the difference? I'll tell you why. It is possible not to have slaves. Could be that no one in the world like today, no one in the world has Jewish slaves to set free. So therefore, the Torah is not going to make it contingent upon something that could be and never happen. But the don't tell me that there's a possibility that nowhere in the world will you be able to find the shofar. Of course not. So therefore, because you have animals, so therefore, when the Torah says that Yovel is dependent on something, it has to be something that's always available. It's always possible. And what is that? Blowing the shofar. So that's Rabbi Yossi explaining himself why shofar is pivotal and not releasing the slaves. Another pshat is, you want to know another? I'll give you another reason why shofar is critical and not this releasing slaves. That the shofar, who blows the shofar? It's the bezdin that blows the shofar, and they instruct everybody now. It's able, do whatever you have to do. However, setting the slaves free, it has to do with individual people. And let's say if people refuse to set them free, let's say they do have slaves, but refuse to set them free, it's an individual thing. So we don't have control. Therefore, if the Torah says that Yabel is dependent on something, it has to be something we have control, like blowing the shofar, which is given over to Bezdin. The Bezdin will do the right thing. Torah will not make it contingent upon something that we, the Bezdin, don't have control, which is setting the slaves free. So why do you have to give a second explanation? You already explained it. The shofar is always available, it's ubiquitous, and Shaluach Chavad is not always available. That's a good enough answer. What do you have to also answer me whether we're in control or not? So if you're going to argue and say, so he might argue me, how's it possible? Nowhere in the entire world, maybe you don't see it Israel, but in the entire world, you don't have one person to set his evets free. So it's always possible. How do you know the Torah didn't make contingent upon setting up one free? Just because you don't see it Israel, there must be somewhere in the world with an evet and someone can set him free. If I give you the second answer, if you want to argue that way, I give you a second answer is Zumas or the Bezin. This is in the hands of the Bezin, and this is not in the hands of the Bezin. Says he about a bish, Rabbi Yesh explains so very nice why he thinks blowing the shofar is critical to bring upon, set upon, bring upon us the evil, while the other things are not. But El Rabbi Yehuda, my time, Rabbi Yehuda came along and said, no, the main thing that sets the yovel is the setting free of the avodim. Where does Rabbi Yehuda get this from? On Makra, because the pasuk says clearly, what are you going to do on yovel? The main thing of yovel is ukorosim deroid ba'aretz. You should go ahead and proclaim freedom in the land to all its dwellers. And therefore he says, Ksav, he holds mikra nidrish lefanov. That the last thing that it talks about, the thing before it, and therefore when it says Yevel He. So what's Yevel He? Only Krosim Drei. He said called freedom, and then says Yevel He. So obviously Yevel He is referring to the thing that was written right before it, and that is freedom. Freedom is slaves can go back home. The pasuk before talks about blowing shofar. That's called lifnei fanav. It's a pasuk before a pasuk, and we don't say that this part of the pasuk goes back to psukim. So the mikra nidish lefanav, that the pasuk, you read the flow of the pasuk. It says this is yevel he. This is yevel. What's yevel? Based on the words I just said. He says that you can proclaim freedom. That's setting the slaves free. But don't go back to the pasuk before then, where it talks about shofar. Okay, that's the argument. Says everyone agrees the word droid, lashon chedes, means freedom. My mashma. How does droid mean freedom? What is a and the Gemara now really is saying, what is a definition of freedom? The Tanya we learned, ein droid ela lashon chedes. Droid means free. Why does droid? Droid normally means a dwelling. So why does a dwelling mean free? Says you want to know the definition of droid? This Friday is not droid. Even though they call it, release, it's not release. Because you know what freedom is? You can live in total control wherever you want to live. You can take your merchandise and move around the entire country. Amazing. The definition of freedom is that you can freedom of movement. That's the definition of freedom, which we're not getting this weekend, unfortunately. Anyhow, so the Gemara continues. These two opinions of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi that you don't need all three criteria. You don't need setting the slaves free. You don't need to return the properties and blow the shofar. One of them is enough. Now, it's only which one. Rabbi Yosi says blowing the shofar is the most important thing, and Rabbi Yehuda says setting the slaves free. But there's a third opinion. In order for you able to be treated as Yevel, and all the Yisurim kick in, it's only if you have all three things: that slaves are set free, properties are returned to their rightful owners. If someone made a sale during the 50 years, it goes back at the end of the by Yevel, and the blowing of the shofar, because they hold mikra nidish lifanav. The lifnei fanav, the pasuk goes before, which talks about freedom of slaves. It goes lifnei fanav, which talks about shaykhut. Ul achrav, and talks about the property should go back. That's the written afterwards. It says v'shachtim ishalach. It says later on, the next pasuk talks about the property should go back to the rightful owner, and that's also which says v'shachtim ishalach and so on. Says the Gemara v'ksiv yoivu. You're telling me that it's very limited, that yoivu can only happen if it meets all three criteria. But the word yovel itself is expansive. It's coming to include. What's it coming to include? You know what it comes to include? The afilu b'chutz la'aretz, coming to tell you that even in chutz la'aretz, they have to follow yovel. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? Well, see, it says the pasuk ba'eretz. It says v'korosim d'roi ba'eretz. That was where? Or ba'aretz, only in Yisrael. What that means is bizman shenoyeg d'roi ba'aretz noyeg b'chutz la'aretz. Bizman she'enu noyeg d'roi ba'aretz enu noyeg b'chutz la'aretz. Even the chutz la'aretz have to set the slaves and all that. But as long as ba'aretz, as long as Yisrael they meet the criteria, then the entire world has to follow it. So the word yovel is expansive to tell you it's not limited to Yisrael. And the word he is coming to tell you that in order to be able, you have to meet all three criteria: setting slaves free, returning the properties, and blowing the shofar. The next case in the Mishnah is that Rosh Hashana is for the tia. Tishrei is Rosh Hashana for plants. The tia is really a sapling, and then we have an elon. When the sapling grows a couple of years down the track, it becomes a tree. So here's very interesting. We all know that the third year, after 3 years, the first 3 years, any fruits that grow on the tree or the sapling is called arla. It's forbidden. You're not allowed to eat. You don't have nothing. Then the next year is called revai, the fourth year, which you would have to bring it to the shlang, which we don't, so we don't eat either. And then the fifth year is only when you're permitted to eat from the fruits. How do you calculate these years? It seems from the Mishnah very simple. You calculate the years by Tishrei, right? You have to have Rosh Hashana. And as long as you start 30 days before, so that's already considered a year, and then you count Rosh Hashanah. So where does Tu B'Shvat come in? What's Tu B'Shvat Rosh Hashanah Li'ilams? What is that all about? So before we go inside, the calculation works as follows: if you planted it with before 30 days, let's say you planted the month of Av, so that year becomes 1 year, and then the next year becomes the next year, and then 30 is the third year. So now you're Rosh Hashanah 2 years and 2 months later, right? Which legally is considered 3 years. You think your Arla expires, but it doesn't. It doesn't expire, your Arla, because now it's no longer a sapling, it's a tree. And as a tree, it grows from the sap that's inside the tree, and you're growing from the sap of last year. Therefore, any fruits that blossom between Rosh Hashanah of the fourth year, let's say, until Tu B'Shvat, it's considered third-year fruits because it grew from the sap of the tree. So Tu B'Shvat, so it's really more. It's really more than just Rosh Hashanah. It has to go all the way to Tu B'Shvat. Any fruits that start growing after Tu B'Shvat in the fourth year is considered the fourth year, and it is permitted. So the reason, the logic behind the way Rashi and others trying to learn is, the logic behind it is we cut off the first year. So whatever we cut off the first year, we have to add a little bit to the last year. The first year, all you had is a month and a half, and we said it's treated like a whole year. You have to make some of that up when it comes to the following year, so the third year. So you have what? You have to wait all the way to B'Shvat. In other words, following Rashi's line of reasoning, if let's say you planted it the first year, if you planted it between Rosh Hashanah and Tu B'Shvat, which then means, and so that's considered a full year, but you also went through Tu B'Shvat. So then in that case there, you'll have you made up, you have 2 years and 7 months. So when it comes to Tishrei you finish your 3 years, Tishrei, you don't have to wait for Tu B'Shvat anymore. Now you can eat the fruit straight away. Or it's the fourth year, you wait till the fourth year. Now you can eat straight away. You don't have to wait Tu B'Shvat, because the whole idea of Tu B'Shvat is to add. You took off so much on the other end. As if you planted it after Tu B'Shvat, year number 1, so you missed out a number of months. We added back in year number 3, number 4. That is how Rashi learns. Others learn that regardless of when you planted in year number 1, you always have to wait to B'Shvat, because it grew from the sap of the tree of the year number 3 or year number 4, and we need only the fruits of after Tu B'Shvat is considered growing now this year. Now let's learn the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Benolon, how do you know that when it comes to the Tiyah, it's Tishrei? The Gemara explains. It says the pasuk, Sholosh Shonim, 3 years, Arelim, 3 years. The fruits are considered an Orlam, and you're not allowed to eat it. Look, see, then it says about Shonri, the fourth year, Your fourth year, you bring it up with you to Yerushalayim. And therefore, because it was Shana Shana, the Yalif Shana Shana Metishrei, and we learn out there's a Mereshis Hashana, the Achel Shana, it says by Tishrei. So therefore, we'll say we mean Tishrei. The same as the pasuk Mereshis Hashana says the Gemara of Yosef Shana by Nisan, the Ligam Shana Shana Menisan. Why don't we learn out the Ligam Shana Shana Nisan? Why don't we learn out Shana Shana from Nisan? The Chesiv it says Rishon Hu Lachem Lechotche Hashana. So we already said before, Donin Shana She'eni Mechadashim. It's more similar to Tishrei because both of them it says the word Shana without adding Chodesh. So we learn Shana that does not couple with Chadashim. The Shana she'eini mechadashim. The Ein Donim, we do not compare Shana she'eini mechadashim. Shana that doesn't have it's not coupled with Chadashim. Mishana sheyesh ima Chadashim. Shana that does have Chadashim. In the Braisa, Echad Hanoiteya, whether you plant, you're planting seeds and you're planting a sapling. The Echad HaMavrich, or whether, as Rashi explains, Mavrich is that you take one of the branches and you bend it over and you put the other end into the ground so it starts sprouting into a new tree. You have to start all over again. The Echad HaMarkiv, whether you are grafting into another tree is also considered as if it's starting afresh. And Orla. Actually, in the Shainim talk about it's not so simple because other places it says grafting is not Orla. So it depends what you grafted it to. If you grafted it, first it depends what Trace explains. If it's still attached to its original tree, then and just grafted it into another tree as well, it does not have a new arla because it's still part of the original tree. If you severed it from the original tree, it starts afresh, and you start counting the years of arla. Or it depends whether it goes to a fruit tree or non-fruit tree. So, Erev Shvius. If you did it prior to Shemitah, Shloshim Yom Lifnei Rosh Hashana, if you did it a minimum of 30 days prior to Rosh Hashana, we will treat that as a full year, number one, as far as Orla is concerned, and we'll also treat it as if you started it before Shemitah year, and therefore you could benefit from it. Also, Shana is treated like a full year, and till when you come to the Shana, say that's it. Year number one is just elapsed. You're allowed to continue with it in the year of Shemitah because we learned before the Chodesh of Kotzah Tishbaz, you have to add to Shemitah, which means you add 30 days. There's two reasons why. Either because, like Rashi says, you have to add to Shemitah 30 days, and that's why the criteria is 30 days, but also it takes 30 days for it to take root. If it's less than 30 days, it never took root in the ground, just sitting there on the ground. When it comes to trees, comes to plants, it's 3 days. When it comes to trees, it's 30 days. But Pachas Mishlesh Yom Hashana, if let's say he did a week before Rosh Hashana, Le'olza Le'shana, then it's not considered a year, and for the first year only starts on Rosh Hashana, and also the Kaim Mishrius. It's as if you planted it on Shemitah, and you cannot have any benefit from Shemitah. Then he continues, Peidas Netiyazu Asurim, but even comes to year number 3, you finish your 3 years of Orla. Let's say you planted it in the Chodesh of. And then 2 years and 2 months later, we just said you 3 years elapsed, or 3 years and 2 months later, you 4 years elapsed. We don't say, now you can start eating straight away, Rosh Hashanah. No. You still have to wait for Tu B'Shvat, because any fruits that have blossomed between now and Tu B'Shvat is considered last year's fruit. Only those things which begin to blossom after Tu B'Shvat is considered this year's fruit. Im la Orla, the third year will treat like Orla, the fourth year will treat like Vayis. How do we know that we carry over to Chayda? You would think as soon as Shana comes along, that's it. Tishrei comes along, that's it. The year's up. Why do you have to wait till Tu B'Shvat? They bring it over and Mashmei de Rabbi Yanai, and they bring it over also in the name of Rabbi Yanai, and that is, and other people are leaning towards saying it's Rabbi Yanai. On Makra, if you look at the pasuk when it talks about the third year and the fourth year, it adds a verb. So you look at the pasuk before when it says that it's Orla. And instead of saying Ubashana Revis is a new pasuk, which means, and what about the fourth year? Also, and the conjunction of and brings it attaches it to the pasuk before, which is the third year it's Arla Ubashana Revis, including it goes spills into the fourth year till Tu B'Shvat. So Omakra says the pasuk Ubashana Revis, and in the fourth year it's part of Arla. Then it says in the pasuk as well, and the fourth year you have to bring it with you to Yerushalayim, and the next pasuk says, and the fifth year you can go ahead and eat it. Again it says, and in the fifth year. So take the and bring it forward, as if the pasuk where it says you got to bring it to Yerushalayim says, and in the fifth year also you got to bring it to Yerushalayim till Tu B'Shvat. Ubashachmei pa'amim on occasion shebelevius v'adayin asura mishumala. It's the fourth year and yet it's forbidden when? If it grew before Tu B'Shvat. If you find it on the 5th year when you would think that all the fruits are not permitted, and it's growing on the tree, it's asa. Why? Because it's before Tu B'Shvat. So therefore, that's how we know that Tu B'Shvat is really the turning point. And we'll see tomorrow's Gemara why 30 days. Usually we say 1 day is considered a year. We'll continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem. Everyone have a good day.
Thank you. Good day.